food, there's all right, I'm gonna start and like always, I like doing questions that you have before I choose a subject, but I know there are a lot of pressing subjects these days, unfortunately.
Yeah. Is there any Jewish ethics reason for what's going on in Israel as far as the Israelis just overturned a food truck that was going to Gaza?
Oh, good question.
Threw it out, and what Netanyahu's doing by not listening to the rest of the world.
All right, I'm gonna repeat it just in case the three on Zoom don't hear it, but basically the question was, is there a Jewish ethics
Yes.
reason, not reason even, is there a Jewish ethics take on what's going on in Israel? Specifically, though, the question was about the overturning. So over the last 7 months, there have been protests. I think they call it something 9. It's a group of people that are attempting, bless you, are attempting to block all the aid and the trucks that are driving to Gaza. You didn't?
No.
Okay, so I think I'm trying to remember what they call it, but it's something 9, order 9 or something.
Who's
Jews are behind that. Jews, people from Israel, Israeli citizens.
I can't say this, but from brief pictures I saw, it might be the Orthodox, but don't hold me.
Okay,
Okay.
so I
have seen where Hamas has been.
that's another thing. We're sticking to. Rick is sticking to our side for a moment. Basically, so again, the question is there a Jewish ethics opinion to that? Including, I think the more recent one was where they actually burned a truck or flipped it over. They flipped it over.
And they flipped it over and took all the things.
And then the second part, no. The second part of the question was about Netanyahu not listening to international opinion. Right. I'll start with the aid truck. You know, I was reading a statement from the Israeli government about that, saying that this is not our values. We don't believe in first of all, stopping the aid. So really the question is, let's go back a step. Is it our obligation to even provide the aid? Let's ask that question.
I think so.
Why is it our problem?
It's the world.
That's what I'm getting at. That's what I'm getting at.
It's the world.
Why is it Israel's responsibility to provide the aid? That's what I was asking.
Are they asking why Israel should be supplying all of it or part of supply?
So and I haven't read enough about the Order 9 group, but I should now that you asked it. Yeah, it's like they made a name. I think Order 8, if I understand correctly, is like the call up to reserves. So Order 9, they created their name, and I could be wrong about that, but again, is a group of protesters who are saying, give us back our hostages, then you'll get your aid. Meaning, why should we help you with food while you still hold our people? That's really their argument. I don't know that it's Orthodox or not Orthodox. I would have to look into that. I actually always understood from the news articles that it's like national, meaning a lot of people feel that way and it's not my style. I ain't going to a protest like that. But people who have that, other people might feel that way, but to actually go and protest and stop a food truck is like, first of all, you're breaking the law in Israel. It is breaking the law. In fact, a lot of times when it becomes too overwhelming, the Israeli military calls it military zone and they say, you can't even be here. So the ethics wise, it's for sure a problem to ruin food. So I'm not even going into stopping the aid, because stopping the aid, you can always say there's another way to get it.
Yeah.
Bring it through Egypt, bring it through.
One particular.
Yeah, so I would, like, the Jewish opinion is for sure to destroy food is a bad omen. It says, like, if you destroy food, then it's a bad omen for the blessings of food that you need.
Right.
Like, that's why people don't throw out bread or food until it's spoiled. It's a very, that's also a sentiment. I'm sure many people have nothing to do with religion. But in general, the Jewish opinion would be that destroying food that is of good value at the current moment, which is what they did, would be a problem, Jewish law-wise, more than just ethics. But then again, the question, Lou, if you want to speak up, feel free to just unmute. Then the second part is, I'll help you find that button. The second thing is it is it Israel's obligation to even provide the aid? And I will tell you that Israel really isn't providing the aid, if we're being honest. The aid is coming from international groups, and Israel's
That's
just,
what I wanted to know.
yeah. So, and that's a good point.
Israel has to allow the aid, but
Correct. Israel is not providing the aid. The aid is coming from all these international groups. Israel, for security reasons, regulates it so they can check the trucks. What else is on there? Did somebody smuggle something into that truck? So in the beginning, like when they were complaining, Israel is not allowing enough aid through, it had to do with Israel not allowing enough aid through. According to whose standards? The international poll of opinion. Was it enough aid or not? I actually saw a very interesting video recently, and I'm sure this is isolated, meaning I'm sure it's not the entire Gaza Strip like this. But right now, there is so much food in the strip that prices in the markets have like tanked. It's like, if you want vegetables, there's a million vegetables here right now. But I am sure that that's isolated, meaning in some areas, the aid is coming through in droves, and in other areas, we know there are a lot of players on the Gaza side of the border that really control where things go, unfortunately still.
Yeah.
And
What
so,
aid can we deliver aid to anyone?
right, exactly. Who is helping facilitate it? If they are, I'm going to say nefarious players, they're not helping you. They have their own intent. And to be honest, if we're going to be honest, Hamas is not trusted.
No.
In fact, their numbers that they have been giving of the death toll has finally been acknowledged by the United Nations as false by half. And even the other half, they're not sure. It could be more than that. So the fact is you're dealing with people who are not, they don't really care about their people.
No.
So the aid flow is a problem within Gaza itself, and that you can't blame everything on Israel.
Right, no, I do.
No, that I agree. Yeah, in general, should we be protesting or not? I mean, it is a Jewish thing and Jewish law to do everything within our means to get our people back. And not at a value of 40-1, but at a value of 0-1. And we don't have to give anything to get our people. In fact, Jewish law does talk about this. There's a very famous story. I think the rabbi was from Rottenburg, Germany. I think that's what it was, who was kidnapped for ransom. And he told the community to not pay it, because if they're going to pay it for him, they're going to just kidnap another rabbi afterwards. And so even after he died, they didn't give the body back. In fact, I'll Google this story soon to read the whole thing. It started with the Torah, I think. There's a whole story about it. So Judaism is very clear that if we're giving back more than one person for one person, it's emboldening others, and that might not be the right thing to do according to Jewish law. Now, tell that to the family members, and that's another conversation. And so what you are really finding within the Israeli society is two different groups of families of hostages who protest. Some protest ceasefire right now, which I don't think people realize even what that means, because there isn't another side for this ceasefire. And then others are protesting, go all in, don't, why are you waiting? So it's like a tricky thing. If you are in the government, it's like, these are hostage families. You don't want to be insensitive.
Question was concerned about from Netanyahu is that he said he will go into Iraq for a period in the sentence. The international community wants a plan for them so that they don't harm citizens, which is international law.
They also want an end point.
They're also looking
But
for,
they don't come
for an
from
end
any-
plan. That's
Right.
what comes.
An end plan, like who's taking over after? I'll tell you,
Israel is not going to.
right. I do read a lot of, I'm sure everyone here reads a lot of the current events. There was an article that someone shared with me yesterday that basically was saying how really the US government is changing the wording slowly. At first it was, we're going to destroy Hamas. Then the Israeli government, which still says that, is now like leaning into America, which is saying, well, you're never going to defeat Hamas completely. So we need to, they're kind of changing the wording, and we who just follow, we don't really catch those nuances. But in the big scheme of things, that's actually a very big detail. Are we going to destroy Hamas that they are no longer? Or are we going to destroy them enough that they can't? Israel was saying destroy them. There shouldn't be anything left. Can they? I am not a military man.
They can't.
Well, there was an article in the paper this morning that Turkey just said that there are
1,000.
wounded Hamas fighters in their hospitals in
Right.
Turkey.
And so there's a very big question, how did they get there?
How did they get there?
I know, there's a lot of questions.
And if they're in Turkey, I'm sure there are most people in the United States.
I wonder, but I'll tell you the truth, I wonder if that's a true statement. And if it is it that they went through Egypt? Because one of the things that, why did Israel go into Rafah in the
How
beginning?
did they get out of it? How did they get out?
Through the Rafah crossing to
Yeah.
Egypt. I do know that,
I don't think.
yes, I agree.
I don't think that Egypt would be,
Facilitating.
there is as against Hamas as,
They don't want them in their country. That's the joke, right?
Yeah.
The two bordering
Okay.
nations do not want Hamas. They want it to be Israel's problem.
that's true, but
Yes, yeah.
Hamas has created difficulties for Egypt. They're not allowing the refugees, the Palestinians, who supposedly are not guilty of anything, into them.
Right.
Right. Now,
But this is a long-standing.
It's because they don't
problem.
trust them.
Yeah.
That's right.
Qatar
Yes.
has said if Hamas, now, I don't know if I'm gonna back this up. Qatar has said if Hamas does not accept any ceasefire agreements, they may kick
Right.
Hamas out of the country.
Right.
Who?
Qatar. Out
Oh.
of Qatar. Now, if they're gonna back that is gonna be a big deal.
Yeah, so that was already a couple,
That was a couple weeks ago.
yeah.
But yeah, no, so my second part is this, now, is Netanyahu looking at Jewish laws and rules,
No.
ethics,
No,
by not having a plan to go
For
to
after.
Rafah without harming the citizen, without harming the.
they did it for.
Okay, so hold on, so just,
Form, yes. but-
so wait, so the question is Netanyahu following Jewish law and ethics?
Jewish law and ethics.
Yes.
Well, let me ask you the question, what is the Jewish law and ethics, if we're going to be honest? For a war,
I don't know.
Yeah.
right? Because this is a war, people are trying to kill us.
Yeah, there's a.
So maybe we're going beyond the letter of the law by warning them. And maybe every building that has a terrorist is fair game to be
Oh,
leveled.
Yeah, that I agree.
So when we come back to this question, I think it's kind of the multiple stages of your question. Number one is, in Jewish law, should we go into Rafah if our hostages are there? Then 100%. If there are people there who are trying to kill us, then 100%. Now, just because international opinion is saying, if you go into there, we are going to stop whatever, that's
No,
another.
Say stop, I'm just saying, is killing innocent civilians. If that is part of this plan, we don't know what's next.
Right, I'll tell you the truth, I don't think any rational observer, I'm not talking about protesters, believes that Israel's trying to kill innocent civilians,
Right,
right? I mean, you have to honestly
I mean, there are.
be drinking someone's Kool-Aid,
mistakes.
mistakes for sure, it's,
It's
no
not-
one's arguing.
Not
It's
talking
not
I'm talking about just,
mistakes.
Yeah, yeah,
If they're hiding in apartment buildings,
Or hospitals.
and you're going to go into those apartment buildings to get them, you're going to have you're going to have casualties of the Palestinians. That's war.
right,
I'll tell you something interesting, not to apply this, but in Jewish law, there were two types of wars. There was a war that was called Melchemet Harashut, which means a war of permission. And then there was a Melchemet Mitzvah, a war that was a mitzvah, an obligation to fight. Someone at your border who is even amassing an army, they haven't attacked you yet. It is an obligation to fight them, right? Because your lives are at risk. A war of permission is where you're trying to expand or something, but not.
but
So in these wars, I mean, the Jewish law might say, wipe them out. because I'm not saying, by the way, this is what you should do here.
Yeah.
I'm talking about like the law, if these people are all trying to kill you and their children have been taught to kill you,
So it is.
but again, that doesn't mean we fight that way. Israel doesn't follow Jewish law, if we're being very honest, in their wars or in their government. That's not how their country was formed. Their country was formed based on secular law, if I could use that. It's not the only thing religious in Israel, like in law wise, that they left, if I understand correctly, is marriage. Like that, you don't go through civil marriage, you go through the Jewish court. Right, in Israel, which is why it's funny, I was speaking to somebody, okay, I was in Colombia, I'm in a taxi or an Uber, and the guy tells me that his sister lives in Israel. Like, your sister lives in Israel? He has 2 sisters living in Israel. And he's visited them. I'm like, that's so interesting. Like, how did they end up in Israel? Basically, the law of return. They have a great grandfather or somebody who is Jewish. And so with Aliyah laws, they could go to Israel, even though they're not Jewish. So while we're talking, he tells me that his sister married, I know he's not Jewish, his sister married a person from Israel. So I said, oh, interesting, Jewish, not Jewish? So he says, Jewish. So I said, and they got married in Israel or they got married out of the country? I already know that if you're doing a marriage ceremony, the only way that Israel will recognize it is if you got married out of the country. If you get married in the country, it has to be Jewish to Jewish or not Jewish to not Jewish. And so he's like, you're right, they got married out of the country. So my point is like, Israel does have that slight part of their society that they kind of have allowed the religious world to still have their say in it, but the country is not based on Jewish values particularly. The people are
Where'd you
Jewish.
go?
System. You say that, Lou? Lou, are you saying something? Anyway, so
And that, and parts of the government, you don't have to be Jewish to be, I think that's it. So.
No.
and
Right.
filling in my-
and again, I think part of it is like you just said, 20% of the Israeli citizen population is not Jewish. And their country
Well, it's not all.
is meant to remain, they want to retain the Jewish identity of the country, but they do give equal rights to all. That doesn't mean you won't feel some of we're being honest, you're going to feel some of that questioning and lack of trust from the other society to a degree.
United States.
True, but we're not, yes, I'm not even gonna try to answer. You're right, you're right. But I think Israel, those people feel it more.
They feel it more religiously, I think, too. Because of the Jewish religion versus the Muslim.
Right, but I mean, most of the Israeli citizen population is not religious. It's more, I think it's a trust,
Yeah.
right? Enough murders have happened to Jews by Arabs or Palestinians that until you kind of move past that, it's always gonna be part of the conversation. And in America, to use your point,
Vice versa, because the Orthodox
murder?
oh, yeah.
Only,
West Bank.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's, hold on. We should have this as a conversation.
Isn't it something?
Let's, hold on, time out,
Okay.
time out. Nothing close.
Yes, nothing close.
Not even like this close.
But the reasoning is.
But I'm saying, when was the last time you know of a life taken?
3 months.
There have been some, I don't know that story,
Yeah.
but I do know that in our history, there have been some crazies. And by the way, there's nothing Jewish allowing that. So they're clearly people who are extremists.
Finding olives in their olives.
Okay,
In their own olive.
maybe I did hear about that story.
Haven't there also been fires where they set fires?
Yes, yes. So that's why I'm agreeing. Extremism I know about. But between me and you, that's not the,
That's more of the issue.
exactly, and that's also not an Israel issue. That's not Israel persecuting people.
No. Yeah, it's individuals.
And if we're going to compare them, we're talking about like night and day.
Yeah, we're talking.
Those are not the factors. Those are people nitpicking and saying, that's why. No, that's not.
But it's also, and this falls, and it's got nothing to do with it, it's just a comment. It also falls to publicity. The publicity on the negative side.
Of course.
The land side is so. good.
Right, I agree with you, like,
And on the Israel side is so
because the
low.
fact is like Israel condemns those things. That's a fact.
Yeah.
We condemn those things. Right, and then the US government says we're going to call those people extremists and terrorists, and they choose 6 people in the West Bank. That, we all know that that's for show. I agree with you. The fact is every normal human being who lives in Israel is against those killings.
Yeah.
Or persecution, or whatever we want to call it, racism, whatever you want to call it. The average American and the average Jewish American, the average Israeli, and when I say average, I don't mean 60-40, I mean like 99%, 99 point something, would love to have peace, would love to be able to get but they have a lot of hurdles to kind of overcome, which is how do we find the trust?
And not just the Israeli Jews, there's a lot of Palestinians who would like
Peace.
peace too.
And there's a lot of Arabs in there.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yes.
I think most people agree.
Yeah.
I think when you talk about Gaza, though, for a moment, the proof is in the pudding. There were 3 different polls. I think one was 87%, one was 71% or 70 something, and one was 81%. That polled the average Gazan citizen who is not Hamas, and they were all proud of what Hamas did on October 7th. Now that's a number that's dangerous, right? These are not people who picked up guns and shot people, but they were proud of it and would have done it if they could have done it.
Okay.
Now that's a dangerous number.
Are
You
aware
referenced that in the beginning.
that the Palestinians in Gaza are given money from Hamas?
Yeah.
And if one of their children becomes a terrorist,
Correct, yeah.
they are there for the rest
Can I
of their
break it
life.
to you?
They
That's
have-
on the West Bank too. That's from Abbas as well.
Become a terrorist, yes. Otherwise.
Well, no,
do
even
not
if
get-
they don't.
No. Hamas
Wait.
keeps all the money.
My daughter has friends who live in Israel. She went to school with them. And he gives her a lot of information that we don't have. The reason it was so easy for the terrorists to get into Israel was because Palestinians from Gaza who work in Israel scouted out all these things and gave them information as to how to
Right.
get into Israel.
They didn't even
That's
use
not
that
on the news.
That goes to the 70-80%.
That's on the news. You're just reading, you're listening to the wrong news.
Right, because that was in the news.
No.
Yes.
She's
Not-
agreeing with you.
Not to the extent that my daughter knows.
Right, I think, I'll tell you,
No.
you know what? No, but what Rita is saying is that was in the American news.
Yeah.
It might have to do with what channels you watch, I don't know.
Maybe it was in once. And
Right.
if you didn't read the newspaper that day.
No, I'll tell you something interesting. There was a house that wasn't touched in one of the kibbutzim. And when they found the notes off one of the terrorists, it said, they're never home on the weekends. They go somewhere for Shabbat. Meaning they really scouted it out.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, but again, I think we all agree, and I've shared this here, or maybe not here, but in conversations. I read this somewhere, so it's not my idea, but I feel like it's so true. The real fix to live in peace is going to be through education, and truly through supporting new infrastructure and rebuilding it.
Yeah.
But like, if the schools are always going to teach hate, you're never going to get past this. And so that has to be fixed. And part of the problem with that is the United Nations, who supports their schools, and it's taught in their schools. So we're going to have a never-ending vicious cycle of this.
Yeah.
But I want you to know, and this is, I think, the most important details. This fight has nothing to do with the state of Israel. Before the state of Israel, in 1920s, there was I think it was the Hebron massacre, 1929. 1930s, there was a very big massacre.
Yeah, I think I've heard.
The problem is Jews. It wasn't the Jewish state.
Yeah.
And so that is
You see
Who
it-
knows what's gonna happen even if you do education?
Yeah, you see it brewing.
Well, that was the
So-
reason that they were allowing the Palestinians to come into Israel to work. Because they were getting a salary, they had money to buy, whatever.
Oh, interesting. So you're saying it was part of
So
the diplomacy, like the
Right,
carrot stick diplomacy.
partly you might say it was education. If the Palestinians realized that they could work within, get salaries, take it back into Palestine to,
Be
to
better
raise
family.
their families,
Right,
that this would make a better,
Right.
I can't.
And the
remember.
fact is Israel needs these labor, Israel needs the labor,
That's
right? So
true.
instead now they're trying to get it from other countries, but
But they always.
even America, right? If we're being honest here, when we talk about immigration, there are a lot of jobs that the average American isn't doing. And there are people who come from other countries who are so happy to work those jobs, make some money.
And
And
it's always worked.
exactly.
sure.
But back
It
to
did.
what you said about education, it's like Northern Ireland, what they did is started having both sides go to the same school. And it showed them they're the same as we are. And they've started that, Leslie Stahl just did that on
Yes.
60 Minutes.
Oh,
About how
yes.
there's schools that both attend, because there's children,
Right, they don't see
depending if
the,
you're not taught the hate, you have to be taught to
Right.
hate.
Exactly.
I mean, it's the same. thing.
actually, if you wanna watch a really interesting interview, Lucy El Harish, I think that's her name. She was an Israeli TV, not just, I think she was a host, but she was a journalist. She ended up marrying a Jewish person. She talks about this because she's Arab, he's Jewish. And so she talks about growing up with that. It was a very interesting interview. I forget all of her details, but it was exactly about this little tension of like growing up in a Palestinian Arab family. I don't remember if she said she like if she grew up with hating Jews, that she didn't, but she grew up in an all Jewish school where she was picked on for being Arab. Now, when I say all Jewish school, the public school system was with her. She was the one or two, Arabs in the school. But she was able to go beyond that. I mean, she speaks for Israel and coexistence. I mean, she doesn't disagree that there's more room to work on. We can talk about race relations in America. It didn't happen
Yes.
overnight, and it's still a progress, but it's moving forward, and that's the key. You think it's moving backwards?
I think it's moving back.
I'm a little bit worried that, yeah, it is
Yeah.
starting.
It has to move forward.
Yeah,
but it's
What,
taking a
what's,
step back.
in the South, they're trying to restrict voter rights. That's
All right,
back from
hold on.
the-
That part, are you talking about because of voter IDs?
No,
No.
the black.
Black.
Yeah, but I'm saying, how are they doing it?
By,
Well,
gerrymandering.
it used to be, well, it used to be the only people in the South who could vote is if they owned land. The blacks couldn't
Didn't own
afford
land.
to buy.
No, but nowadays it's not.
land, so they weren't allowed to vote. That's changed.
To what?
But where.
You
if
don't have to
were
own
a
land.
Citizen and you
Right.
lived in this.
I think even though you're talking very ambiguous here, I haven't heard why and how, but I think that most people point to the voter ID as the way that they're suppressing votes.
No, they did some gerrymandering
I don't
in a couple of
understand
the
this.
states, and the Supreme Court
Well, that's always
knocked it
been.
down. Because.
What was
they
that
did-
about?
It was, Georgia was one
Oh,
of the
yes,
states,
yes.
but Georgia redistricted everything so that there were no majority black.
Every state does that.
Or there was
Yes,
only
they said-
one.
Okay, but that's not about suppressing votes. That's about getting them to not have the same voice. I think what you're saying. It's like they won't have representation but
Yeah,
they did that in Arizona too. Like, that is, I don't know if that's about blacks or that's about who runs the government right now. And if we can get more Republican districts or
Right.
goes both ways, but like,
All right, what is-
Yeah.
I think what you're referring to, if anything, is ID, right? That's the
No,
big,
it wasn't ID.
No, it wasn't.
but that's the big thing now, like voter ID.
that's for, yeah,
It's the big deal if I show my.
I'll
voter
tell
ID card.
Well, the argument, which I don't necessarily agree with, but I'm sharing what the argument is. The argument is they don't have IDs. And so if they don't have an ID, then they can't vote. If you're poor, think about this, and you never got yourself an ID, and to get an ID costs $12 or whatever,
Oh,
That's how they're talking about
that
it.
I didn't.
Now, on the other hand, let's flip side. I was like,
that
wait a second, how do I know who you are? If you don't have an ID, I'm gonna
Right.
trust you. That's the flip side of the conversation. Now, I will tell you that every country other than America requires you to have an ID to vote. If not, I could show up, use someone else's name and put my vote in.
But Arizona does another thing to suppress Indian vote.
What do they do?
You have to have an address to vote.
Oh, so that's kind of me.
But that's not just the Indians.
But it affects,
Affects homeless.
Can you have a PO box?
No.
it affects the Native Americans more because.
They don't have addresses.
Okay, especially in the Navajo Nation.
Okay, but that's something that that's a bigger, that's,
Yeah.
that's not a new thing you're saying. That's a timeless trying to support the Native Americans.
So maybe we should move on to what your topic was.
My topic's about loving each other.
Which is basically what we're talking.
Yeah, but I'll tell you the truth, my topic, which Israel is a very hot topic, so it's never a problem to talk about it. And I really believe that, regardless of which government would be in Israel right now, what they're doing right now would be the same, because that's how they have a unity government. So clearly, the goal is to bring back the hostages and bring safety and security to the land of Israel. And they're seeing eye to eye. Right now, I think there was a poll over last week that said if there would be elections today, who would get the majority votes? And it would still be Netanyahu's party, Likud. Right, so because Israel, contrary to our TV opinions, actually is very united right now. Unlike before the war, where it was disaster, we know the truth. Like even though they had a majority government, there was huge protests. I mean, those were not small protests about the basic law changes. And so Israel really is united right now. Even though you're going to hear about this protest and that protest, they're nothing close to what was happening before. And the common sense of many Israelis who were on the very forward side of peace have all changed. Like, we can't do peace with that. And it was like a blast of this different air and reality. In fact, there's a very interesting, going back to the kibbutz, there's a very interesting story about a photographer who lived in one of the kibbutzes. A lot of these kibbutz people were very into peace with the Gazans. And so one of them, this woman, she was a photographer. She became friends through the internet with a photographer in Gaza. And they even did, I think, a photo display of some sort with both of their photography. If you read this story, he was on all over social media to kill the Jews. And she couldn't believe it. She's like, here, I thought there's a relationship here. So a lot of those people actually the Nova Music Festival was all about peace and love.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, it's so difficult to have the conversations because, and again, just another thing that's going on right now is like, okay, let's make a state for Palestine. Who is the
I would encourage everyone to not only get their news from the US, but you can go online and read newspapers and watch news shows from other not involved countries.
like?
Well, I like to look at
Piers
the
Morgan?
London Times.
Oh, okay. Is that where Piers Morgan is? He has a lot of interesting debates on his show right
Yeah.
now. Both sides hate them. That's how you know he's bringing in lots of opinions.
Yeah, but you need to look outside and I used to work with a man who read Arabic. He was from Morocco, and so he would read us the Arabic Al Jazeera news.
Interesting.
Yeah, but it's a lot different than the English version, but you need to get multiple sources, just like if you only watch one source in the United States, you're only getting what that producer, what that news team decides is important.
No, that's for sure true. There is a email, and I used to be signed up to it, and I never read them, so I unsubscribed. But it was basically both sides. So any story, they brought you an article. I'm just using, let's say, Huffington Post and Daily Wire, right? To get you kind of both sides of the same story. Again, I don't know what news websites they use, but it's just interesting the concept is very interesting. Because you're right, a lot of us, we go to our
Favorite.
and that's where we read our news. So like right now, just to give you a great example, if you're following the Trump trial, after Stormy Daniels gave her testimony, depending on which website you read, it said either it was amazing or she just ruined it because of blah. You're gonna have the same thing. And it's all up to the person who analyzed it.
Right, and it doesn't even have to be that major. I watch two news stations every night. And one of them, the most important thing going on was the weather in with these storms going on. And the other, the most important thing going on was a recall of some food. So depending.
That's local news, but when you talk about international news,
That was.
that's national news or
Right.
whatever.
But what I'm saying is, if they can steer you on such a little level, think of what they're steering you on a bigger level.
All right. No, there's definitely a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
Yesterday I was watching CBS after Neil in the morning and not Face the Nation. And I couldn't believe how the commentary, the questions, they'd ask a question, and if you didn't get the answer that was somewhat against Israel, she'd word it a little differently. As these, it was very, it wasn't even pro-Palestinian, it was anti-Israel and the way they're doing the war. Do you think this is genocide? And if the guy says, well, then this had to be done, she'd come right, but was it genocide? It's really the national news, the
Right.
commentators, and I don't know whether it's their own view or their network, but boy, their PBS is very it's totally democratic, and which is another problem here. Biden is stuck in the middle between trying to please everybody, but that's Biden. He isn't what he believes.
Yeah, I mean, I do
it's
know.
getting him in trouble.
I think what you're saying, Louis, and I think everyone can see that it became an election year issue now. And
Yes.
so the wind will blow it the way it needs to for votes. But there are some people who are very clear and, it doesn't make a difference. And by the way, that's a very good point. If we're going to be talking about American Jews who, let's say, traditionally vote Democrat, they're at a crossroads. It's a real struggle. I see it online. It's like, is this what I want? And this is a great, by the way, if we want to talk about a Jewish dilemma, how should you vote? Nothing to do with the Israel war or everything about the Israel war. Should I care about what's more important right here locally? And therefore, I have to ignore what's going on in Israel and the opinions of those people? Or what's my top priority? I think that's how every single Israel voter is thinking right now. It's like, is my issue right now Israel? Then I don't like how he's kind of angling it. Maybe I need to vote for somebody who I hate. Or what's more important, the policies here. And then of course, okay, if you're going to say that the current president has gone very far left, that's another conversation. I'm mixing that out. Let's say he is everything else he's doing you like, except for his Israel decisions. You have a very big decision to make. And I'm not here to share answers. I am here to share a question.
I think he's having trouble making up his own mind. He's trying to not lose this Muslim vote, which is scattered around the country, and it's in those Michigan, Wisconsin, where it could cost him the election. I think he'd like to be this totally Israel, like he said, but and also if Israel had these weapons, if they had the weapons they want, fewer people would die because those weapons go where you point them. And it's like, should we have the United States saved lives? I'm not sure they figured it out before or after, when they attacked Japan. They saved American lives and
They did
Japanese
the
lives.
Hiroshima.
Oh,
No, 100%. There's definitely, all of these opinions are out in the public sphere.
Yeah.
Especially the Hiroshima, Nagasaki, leveling two cities to end an existential war. I think those are good points. But on a Jewish perspective, since you asked me for a Jewish topic right now for a moment, to change the subject, but kind of on the same subject, it's like, I'm gonna move that larger conversation just to one part of it for a moment. Within one room, within the Jewish world, you can have different opinions. Some of them literally on two ends of the spectrum, some of them even on the same side of the spectrum, but still different approaches. And I'm sure you have that in Israel within how should we advance in this war? Should we really be waiting because the government of the United States is telling us we shouldn't go into Rafah and therefore we've waited, what, 3 months or whatever it is? Or should we be doing this attack immediately? All of these opinions cause people to... All of these opinions cause people to start looking at other people with less respect. It's like, you can't be right. It's all about saving lives. How can you vote for a president that doesn't support Israel? I don't care that everything else he does is according to your, right? You're having these arguments, they're coming up. And so I think it really is a great conversation about how do we live together, respect each other, even though we have different opinions. I'm not even talking about with somebody who is not Jewish, someone who is Palestinian. I'm talking about within the Jewish world of opinions. And again, there are plenty of Jewish people who are having this awakening. It's like, wait, I vote Democrat all my life. Do I want this? And you had the same thing the other way around, nothing to do with Israel, but when President Trump was coming up for the election, they didn't like who he is as a person. They said, I can't vote for that type of an individual, right? You had these conversations, they come up all the time, and now they're just coming up again in a very, very intense way because the other option is President Trump. And so you have these conversations coming up again. You could sit in a room where people who used to get along or used to even see eye to eye on politics are now conflicted and incredulous at other people's opinions. And so here is a Jewish take on this. Between the period of Passover and Shavuot, there was a rabbi, his name was Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, at his height, had 24,000 students. We're talking about a man who only began studying at the age of 40. And a very fascinating story with his own little history. He marries a woman from a wealthy family. He is a shepherd. The family cuts him and her off. They say, how could you marry such an ignorant person, a Torah scholar, a wealthy person, but this guy? And she says, no, I support him. And she encourages him to study. And at the age of 40, he begins to study. What did he see that changed his mind that said, you know, I can do this? He's walking one day and he sees a stone with a hole in the center of the stone. And he analyzes it and he notices that there's a steady drip of water that is hitting this stone, and slowly it has bored a hole all the way through. And so he said, if water can do that to a stone, how much more so I can do that with study into my thick skull and penetrate it with study and with knowledge. And so he goes to school and he comes back, I think it's 12 years later. He has amassed 12,000 students approximately. And he hears his wife. He hasn't even said hello to her yet. There's a conversation she's having with a neighbor about, you know, her husband who went away to study and hasn't been there, and she's supporting the family, blah, blah, blah. And she says, you know what, if you would keep studying, I wouldn't mind. And so he doesn't even say hello. He turns around, goes back, comes back with 24,000 students. Just to give you the happy part of the story for a moment, his father-in-law has a lot of pain from his decision. And so he hears there's a big rabbi coming to town. He decides to have a meeting with him and ask him to annul his vow. Judaism says, my word is gold. And so if I have promised like that, you know, I am not going to support my daughter, it's like a vow. And so you can't just change your mind. And so a big rabbi comes to town. He wants him to annul his vow. So this rabbi happens to be his son-in-law, but he doesn't know. And so he asks him, he says, can you annul my vow? I had made a vow not to support my daughter. He says, tell me something. If you would have known that your son-in-law would go and study, would you have ever made the vow? He says, no. So he says, your vow is annulled. Right. So now he's able to have a relationship with his daughter, his son-in-law, who he didn't know was his son-in-law. Anyways, Rabbi Akiva has 24,000 students. He's a brilliant scholar. Between the period of Passover and Shavuot, that's 49 days. But really within a 30-day window, 24,000 students die in a plague.
Yeah.
Because of that, the Jewish law dictates that actually between Passover and Shavuot, we actually symbolize that with mourning in our tradition. And so it's traditional that you don't go to live concerts during this time. You don't get haircuts. I'm not going into what you should do in your own life right now. I'm just sharing. And so between Ashkenaz and Sephard, the dates are a little bit of a debate. When did the dying happen? So you'll have different traditions of what days to kind of observe that mourning. But within that, everyone agrees that on Lag BaOmer, which is not this coming Sunday, the following Sunday, no students died. And so that day became a day of celebration of joy. Many years later, one of Rabbi Akiva's students does die on that day. His name is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and he dies naturally, not a plague. He was a brilliant man. He authored the Zohar, the book of Kabbalah. And so on his day of passing, it's a very big day of celebration for all of his teachings and what he added to this world and giving the passion to mitzvot and Torah study. And so that day becomes a day of bonfires. If you're familiar with the very big stampede, I think 46 people died in Israel 3 or 4 years ago. That was on Lag BaOmer, and that was people at Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's gravesite. It's in Meron. It's not too far from Safat. Currently, right now, it's closed because of the shelling from Lebanon. That's how close it is to that border. So that day became a very sad day recently, but the day itself symbolizes so much more. And so there's a very big question. What warranted 24,000 students of the great sage Rabbi Akiva to die during that short window of time? The rabbis asked this question. When the rabbis give an answer, it's very different than when we give an answer because we don't know the reasons. But when the rabbis did it, they have a little bit more of a divine inspiration in their answers. Just like we cannot answer for the Holocaust, but if it would have been in the Talmud and they would have given an answer, we would have a different understanding. But they write something very fascinating. They write that the reason why 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died in a short period of time was because they did not give each other respect. Okay? Now, first of all, why should that warrant death? That's number one. But second of all, and this is also a very big question, is Rabbi Akiva, if you're familiar with him, one of his most known teachings was to love your fellow as yourself, is a general rule of the Torah. How could it be that his students are the ones who missed the point?
Maybe they were loving each other too much and spread.
So explain. Oh, you're saying COVID. That's great. I love that. That's not how the Talmud words it, but I hear you. They just were in too close proximity and weren't wearing masks. Yeah, great point. So the way that it's explained is that there, and I find this very profound, but also very, it's very good, I'm going to say teaching for all times. And that is they had misplaced love. The wording was that they didn't afford respect to each other. It doesn't say they didn't love each other. Now, you can love someone the wrong way.
Yes.
And that's what they did. They all had different opinions. And so to use the example, Judy and I have an argument and I say, listen, I love you, Judy. You have to do it my way because I'm right and I care about you. And that's kind of how this works. They cared so much about the other person, they forgot that people can have different opinions and they can both be right.
Yeah.
Now, some things are, of course, black and white in Jewish law, but many other things are not. Many things are conversation and debatable, and two opinions can be correct. And so that was where they missed his teaching. They missed this idea that says, when you love someone, you have to respect them. You have to realize that they might have a different opinion, and their opinion might be just as right. There are, to use the Hebrew, it says Shivim Panim LaTorah. There are 70 faces to the Torah. You can study something and understand it one way. Another person can study it and understand it a different way.
Yeah.
And they can both be right. Practically speaking, when we come to law, only one answer can prevail. But in the conversation and debate, other people could have very valid opinions. And so they lacked that respect for each other's opinions, for each other's way of analyzing, for each other's way of studying. They said, my way, because I care about you. But that's not love. That's misplaced. And so in our society, we talk, going back to Israel, we could sit in this room and all have different opinions. The question is, how do we look at each other for our opinions, right? There is, to use a word, I'm going to be very nice. I had a guy in my office and he shared, they say that tactics are like, I'm being nice here, are like tuchuses, okay? Use the Yiddish. Everyone has them, right? So you go into war, or you go, if you're a police officer, how should we do this? And say, Rick says one thing, I say another thing. They're all right. Only one's going to win. But everyone has an opinion, and every opinion has some merit to it. So we have to figure out how, as a people, we can live together, disagree and agree, or agree to disagree, but still respect each other for it. And that is where they broke down. So full stop, that was their mistake. That was why a plague was able to wreak havoc among his 24,000 students. Full stop. However, I'm going to answer one other part of the question that I think a lot of us have is like, wait a second, just because they didn't respect each other, doesn't mean God should allow a plague to kill them. Like, that doesn't sound fair. So I am going to touch a subject for just a moment that I don't know that we brought up in our discussions, but it's a subject that really could use a lot more time. And that is the evil eye. We ever talked about the evil eye? I don't think we have.
My mother did once.
Well, no, people talk about it. I meant
Yeah.
we talked about it.
No.
So what is the Jewish take on the evil eye? Right, that's a
What's the
question.
evil eye?
Well, was that Lou?
What is the evil eye? I'm not.
You never heard the words Kanai Nahara? Tfu, tfu, tfu?
Yeah.
Every grandmother
Yeah.
and others as well do this thing. Say, oh, your daughter is so beautiful, or your granddaughter is so beautiful. And they say, Kanai Nahara, Kanai Nahara.
Oh, Kinahara, yeah.
Kanahara, right?
Yeah.
That is to ward off the evil eye.
Oh, okay.
What's this evil eye? To use the joke, this grandmother is, we probably have all heard this. Grandmother's walking on the beach, a huge wave comes and wind comes and throws the granddaughter into the water, and she starts screaming, God save my granddaughter. Daughter washes up to shore, says, thank you, God, but where's her hat? But on that note, so we're all worried, at least in our tradition, we quote it a lot. We're worried about this evil eye. A lot of us don't even know what we're worried about, but what is this evil eye? So the first thing is there is a concept of the evil eye. Should you be worried about is its own question, which I'll get to afterwards. Let me first talk about the evil eye. The evil eye is this concept that says, if things are going well, don't flaunt it. Right? If you look beautiful and someone comments on your beauty, say how ugly you look, right? Because you don't want to provoke the evil eye, right? The evil eye is this concept. I'm dumbing it down, but it will be good for another conversation, maybe with some text. God works with a bank account. That's how I'm phrasing it. We get throughout life a lot of blessings that maybe we're not deserving of. Maybe you find somebody who is such a terrible person and they're wealthy. Say, why does this person deserve that? Or someone who was born with natural beauty and makes money off it. So she didn't even do anything for that, or he didn't, right? but the grace of God gave them that gift. There are many ways that we see this idea that like people are given blessings and we're like, they don't deserve that and they still get it. The evil eye is this idea that God works with a grace period. God says, you know what, a person right now might not be perfect, but I trust that in the future, hopefully they will repent. They'll be deserving of these blessings. Maybe at the present moment, they're not perfect. The evil eye provokes God to do an assessment, but the assessment is in the moment, which means that right now I look at a person and I say, wait a second, right now that person is not deserving. And that's what the evil eye does. It says the judgment changes now. It's like no grace period anymore. At the present moment, they're not deserving. I'm going to judge them based on their current merits. So the evil eye is not a thing, but it's this concept that people are very concerned about. It's like, maybe God is going to reassess all the blessings that I have in my life based on my exact moments of living right now. So I'm going to kind of live a little bit more moderate and a little bit more modest to not provoke this reassessment of judgment. That's a dumbed down version of what the evil eye is. It's kind of like a curse, but the curse is not effective. It's the curse of saying God should reassess that person. My curse has no value to it, but it's like this idea is like, look right now at the moment. That is the evil eye concept. And so Rabbi Akiva's students, by reaching the number 24,000, provoked the evil eye. There is something about 24,000 that pushes that. And so when he hit that number, the evil eye now created the mechanism that God should reassess these students based on their current merit. And at the present moment, they were not providing a proper respect to each other. Now, don't get me wrong, you can still have a problem with the story. I'm just sharing it how it's taught. But that, again, it wasn't like God came and smote them. I want to just kind of actually clarify something, right? A plague happens because a plague happens. COVID happened because COVID happened.
Right.
It doesn't make a difference where it started, lab or not. That's not the point. It's out there now. Is it going to affect me or not? Well, God gives me protections, let's say. But if I'm not worthy of those protections, God still might protect me because that's how the way of the world works. You have a bank. But if I was reassessed at the moment and say, do I deserve that extra protection or not? And I'm not worthy of it, that effect of the natural order will have the ability to affect me more than if I would have been protected. I walk into a war zone, I'm not wearing a hat, a ballistic helmet, and a ballistic vest. Bullets are flying around me anyways. So it's not like God is doing something extra to punish the person. There was a plague. Would it affect them? Well, naturally it should, but maybe with that extra kind of grace period, it wouldn't. But when God reassesses, as well, I'm not giving them extra. That's the idea. It's not that therefore God punished them. I think that's the most important part to keep in mind when you talk about the evil eye. The evil eye does not do anything. Natural order happens. Like you said, they were too close to each other. I know you said that. That idea is going, people weren't washing their hands and bacteria was free flowing, but there was a little bit of extra grace.
Somebody's face.
Right, there's a little extra grace because God was being benevolent. But then God just removed the extra protection. God didn't bring up punishment. That's kind of how we look at this. And so I come back to our story. In any conversation that you have, if you live in a vacuum, that's a problem. So like, it's not worth having a conversation with people who agree with you on every point. So when you have the conversation with people who don't agree with you on every point or bring different perspectives, the question is, how do I now look at these people? And so this story is very clear that the most important thing is respect each other. Now, I will tell you, and I'll end off on this point, I always find this story very fascinating and the lesson within it. Judaism teaches us, what do I do if I have multiple opinions in a room? What do I do practically speaking if it was actually a practical conversation of, let's say, my health? I have 5 doctors and I don't know what way to follow. So Judaism says, follow the majority opinion, right? Unless there's an expert. Okay, let's keep that in mind. So when you're talking about Jewish law, it's the same exact thing. We follow the majority opinion. You could have 18 opinions, but if 10 out of the 18 hold one thing, you follow those 10. In fact, there's a very classic question of one of the debates over Christianity and Jews, where the priest or the king asked the rabbi, says, doesn't it say in your code of law that you follow the majority? Well, the majority of the world believes in Jesus. You should believe in Jesus. And so the rabbi said, you are correct. However, that is only when we don't know the law. Right? So, the majority is not the end all be all. It's in specific scenarios. I'm sharing that on purpose. So we come back to this specific conversation. The majority opinion would be to follow the majority opinion. So if there are 5 and 3 people say that, you follow the 3. So there is a very famous story, and this is where I was getting at. A rabbi who was the most brilliant man in the room in one of these big arguments in a Jewish law conversation, and they weren't following his opinion. And so he says, listen, my opinion is correct, and I'll prove it. If it is correct, that tree will be my proof. The tree jumps 50 feet, miracle. They say, listen, we don't use miracles as proof. And he keeps on doing these different, like, supernatural proofs until at a certain point, the heavens will be my witness that I am correct. And there is a heavenly voice that says he is right. And they answer, fascinatingly, the Torah was given to man. It is not in the heavens. So they didn't listen to the heavenly voice. Okay, he loses the debate. It goes, the final law does not follow him, but the man was brilliant and clearly miraculous too. And so the question is, didn't he know that we follow the majority? Like, why is he still fighting for his opinion? And I always find this part quite fascinating. The answer was, of course he knew that. He was trying to convince them to his way so that the majority would follow his opinion. Right? He wasn't saying follow me, even though he was trying to convince them to agree with his opinion. So when we talk about our conversation about Israel, what's the right thing to do? There are a lot of opinions. There are certain things that are black and white, right? Should you hold back aid trucks? We're not mixing in. Let's say we disagree. Should you burn aid trucks? That's another conversation, right? Destroying property is a problem. So that's a part of a larger question. And so when you're in that room and you have that conversation, you can still disagree and still appreciate each other's opinions. And if we're being honest, the biggest breakdown right now, when we look at all the campus debates, they're not campus debates. The protests that are happening on campus is those encampments don't allow anyone else in. So you can't even have a conversation. I watched a video yesterday from an Israeli guy who came to, I think it was GW, University, George Washington University. And he's having this conversation with one of the Jewish protesters in the encampment. And then people find out that he was an Israeli soldier, and they all, a lot of havoc breaks loose. But the point is like he was having a conversation until they didn't let him have a conversation anymore. And so they weren't going to become friends afterwards. They were just going to appreciate that there are two people who disagree but listen to each other's opinions. Because some of those people don't have opinions. But the ones that do, listen to them, right? They might be wrong. What's the line? It says, this is from one of the debates. It's a Spanish debate with, I think it was Nachmanides, but I might be wrong, who debated a priest in front of a king, and he was given free reign, meaning in those days, debates were very dangerous because if you insulted Jesus or the church, you'd be killed. So you couldn't even have a proper debate. And so this king allowed the rabbi in the debate to speak his mind. And he's like, there's nothing holding you back. You won't be punished for what you say. At the end of the debate, the king says, I've never heard somebody debate in the wrong as well as you. Like he didn't want to be convinced. But that idea, I think, is like, let's have the conversation. So I think that's the most important thing, is to be able to have the conversation and not judge people for their opinions. And I'll use the word free space. It became a new word. It's like, this is a free space to say whatever you want. But respect is key. Now, some people are wrong, right? That's a fact.
Yes.
And so we have to be on the side of right. And on the side of morals and values and ethics, but sometimes morality and values and ethics tell you that you have to kill someone,
Yes.
and that's not easy. And it's not easy to share that with somebody else. Says, no, we have to, whatever it is. But some people do see it black and white. We still have to have that conversation. So that is how I will kind of end on this Jewish addition to that conversation.
Well, thank you.
Pleasure.
Very good.
Thank you.